When I recall, when I was 9 years old, I lived in a yellow home. It's a two-story home, and right across the street was this open field, and in this field, my buddies and I would go over and spend all day in this field, and we'd make this bike trail. And I spent a lot of time on my bike. Actually, my bike was like this little BMX bike. It had a yellow frame with some black handlebars and some of those pads that, that in case you went over your handlebars, you wouldn't hurt yourself. Anyways, I loved this yellow bike of mine. And I spent a lot of time out in this field. And in this field, we made this bike trail. And all around the bike trail, of course, there was weeds growing up everywhere. But only in this area where the bike trail was, where we just put a lot of our time, riding up and down this this bike trail. But at the end of the bike trail, we would build this jump out of dirt and whatever resources we had, maybe some wood, and we build these ramps that would allow us to ride really fast down this bike trail and then hit the jump and try to jump over things like. We always have a contest on who could jump the furthest, and that was kind of the start of our little contest. Was we would see how far we could jump on our bikes, and then we'd mark it with a stick, and we'd stand next to our marking as the next kid in my neighborhood would get on his bike and proceed to jump further than each other. There was one particular friend that we'd always kind of tease and make fun of, and he had kind of a bigger bike, and he sometimes would take this bike and try to jump it as far as he can, but of course the thing wouldn't fly very far because it was a big heavy bike, and we'd sometimes leave him down there, and as the distance thing was a big challenge, we would begin later on adding more things to this, such as running a long hose with water and then filling it up and then digging a hole and then filling it up with water and mud and making it kind of a bit more dangerous. And we would inch it further away from the jump, and we'd make the jump a little bigger, and we would see who would be daring or be the daredevil and be able to jump over this this hole in the ground with water and mud. And there was one friend in particular that we would always tell him, hey, wait just a few more minutes, and we'd actually make the danger a little bit more dangerous because we wanted him to so badly to put his tires into the mud and wipe out. And so we would then tell him, okay, you can go ahead and let's hit the jump. So he would come, and we'd be all anticipating and exciting just to see him wipe out. And I think all of us were looking at each other, wondering who was going to be the first one to wipe out, or who wasn't going to make it over this obstacle. And although growing up, I don't recall myself ever breaking a bone and hurting myself. But we did have a few tumbles. And this one friend of mine, he would always his bike would always hit in the mud, and he would always wipe out and get up, and he'd be mud from head to toe. Although luckily his house was just on the corner there, so he would go and get cleaned up, and then he'd come back and do it again. I don't know, we were just crazy back then. We'd do a lot of crazy things. And we would stay out there all day long, and the only thing that would take us away from that field and away from from jumping all day on our bikes was when our parents would come out of the house and call us in for dinner. And we'd go in quickly and eat dinner, and then we'd come right back out and keep riding our bikes on this bike trail, on this bike jump. And this bike jump was just the ultimate. And I do recall years later, going back there and seeing that there was 2 homes now built on that property that was right across the street from us, and our bike trail was no longer there anymore. But those were some really good memories, was riding my bike. Now, one memory I recall, because I loved riding my bike so much, was there was it was come springtime, and and I got up one morning and I walked outside and ready to ride my bike to my friend's house, and I couldn't find my bike. wasn't anywhere. I looked in the garage, I looked in the backyard, I looked at my friend's house, I looked all over the place and couldn't find it. And my mom and dad were like, well, I guess you're going to learn that you can't keep your bike out front or else it's going to get stolen or somebody's going to steal it and then you're not going to have a bike. Now, I got to tell you, this bike of mine was one beater-upper bike. And I don't ever think anybody in their right mind would want to steal a bike like mine. I mean, this thing had gashes and things broke, not necessarily things broken on it, but a lot of scrapes and bumps and things like that. I mean, I really, really used this bike a lot. And so I don't think anyone would have really wanted to take my bike. But I was convinced. My parents were convincing. My parents convinced me that my bike was stolen. And so for days I was just devastated that I couldn't ride my bike. I didn't have a bike to ride. And my buddies were all riding their bikes and I'd have to borrow their bikes to ride, but it wasn't the same as riding your very own bike because you knew all the ins and outs of your bike and how you rode it and the seat height and all that other good stuff. And so this was a couple weeks before Easter. And so I was really hoping for a new bike, you know, come Easter. And I woke up that morning and went down and lo and behold, there was a brand new bike. And I was so excited I got out there on the street and I was riding it. And I looked down and I suddenly see some scrapes on there, you know, on the frame of this bike. And I look back up and I'm looking, and then I take a little closer look and I'm noticing that the frame looks really similar to my old bike. And then I'm like, but wait a minute, there's brand new handlebars and a brand new seat and brand new, like, lots of brand new things on it that I don't recognize, but I do recognize these scrapes. And I remember, okay, that was when I took that one jump and I hit such and such, and you know, and for a boy growing up and being on his bike so much, you know what scratch was with what jump and with what, you know, ride and so on. So I walked into my house and I sat my mom down and I asked her. And finally, finally she confessed, and apparently, my parents, one of their friends, had taken or stolen my bike to make upgrades to it. So it was my parents who had set me up and had stolen my bike, and yet I always remember that the memory or the feelings I got when I suddenly felt like my bike was stolen, and then all of a sudden it reappeared, but with newer things added to it. But I, you know, I loved my new bike, and I continued to ride my bike, and it was a good experience, good times. And eventually I went from riding a bike to driving a car, but that's another story. And
can you tell me a little bit about your softball playing?
Softball?
Or your kickball?
Kickball?
Yeah.
Well, you know, in the neighborhood I lived in, my parents bought a house with a lot of land behind them. And my dad originally wanted it so that he could practice his golfing. But I never really saw him do much of golfing. But I sure liked the yard. I sure liked the size of it. And I would invite friends of mine over in the evenings. And we suddenly got this big kickball game started. And we would do it almost every weekend. And we would play kickball. And soon the whole neighborhood of kids. We'd have like 15 kids on one side and 15 on another team. And some of us would try to kick it way back there over the fence. And the best ones were when you'd catch the ball and get the person out. Or some of my favorites was just grabbing the ball and throwing it at the person. And if it hit them, they would be out, you know, before they got to first and before they got to second and so forth. But this was an addicting game. This was a game that neighborhood kids would come over and say, "Hey, let's put together a kickball game." And so we'd invite everyone from different age groups over, and some of you knew who was going to kick it the furthest. You knew who was going to kick it the closest, or or who were the weaker players and who were versus the stronger players. I always tried to be one of the stronger players and try to kick it the furthest, But those were some good times. And then we would turn on the lights in our backyard and try to play even longer until we absolutely could not see the ball. And so, that was fun to get outside and to do those things and to be able to ride my bike and to be in an area where I could find the trails easily. Whereas today, there's a lot of houses and a lot of buildings and a lot of fields that have vanished, and there's not a lot of places to just get dirty and ride your bike or play a good kickball game. So